So good afternoon, everyone. Can everyone hear me? Dina, Chloe, can you all hear me?
Yes, yes. We can hear you. Thank
Great.
you.
Yes. I am delighted to be here today to join my dear friend, Bob Segi, Dr. Bob Segi, and all of the staff and board members and supporters that have come together in what I think is probably the most robust family support, family engagement, positive engagement for children and families environment happening in the country right now, among the most, I should say. There's great people doing great work out there around the country. But healthy outcomes from positive experiences is something that is absolutely needed in this conversation today, particularly in the pandemic in which we find ourselves, isolated at home, sheltering at home, working virtually, and all of the resulting challenges and some very positive opportunities that could come from that. But we know that there are some challenges, particularly with children not being in school and some of the psychosocial issues that they may be encountering. So what we've heard from Dr. Segi's keynote today was absolutely inspiring to me, and I hope as equally as inspiring to you. I come to this work with various different hats, as Dr. Segi said. And again, let me thank his staff. Chloe has been absolutely awesome, Dina, and all the other folk who helped get everyone here coordinated and executing as best they can. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I come to this work with a number of different hats. And part of what I'd like to say is, or challenge colleagues on is, what does it mean to be multi-sectorial, multidisciplinary, in my case, multi-religious, multilingual, multi-regional? How do we acknowledge the differences, the uniqueness, the distinctions that we all bring to the work? And I hope that no matter what door through which you enter the work, that you would also find other doors through which to walk and appreciate the different experiences of those who are doing child engagement, child protection, child abuse prevention, family strengthening, along the spectrum of disciplines, the spectrum of experiences. No one experience, no one sector, no one group has a monopoly on how to do this work. And I'm going to say a little bit later, a little more about that later. And so I've been pastoring a urban congregation in the heart of the city of Trenton, which is New Jersey's capital. New Jersey has 3 of the top 10 poorest cities in America on any given year. Camden, Newark, and Trenton routinely ranks at the top of America's poorest, or I should say most economically challenged cities. We know that money does not beget poverty. There's something called poverty of the mind, but there's also something called riches of the spirit. And so I want to be careful on how I say this, but economically, Trenton, where I serve and have served for the last 25 years of my life, routinely ranks in America's most economically challenged cities. With that comes issues of poverty. With that comes issues of concentrated poverty. And so my life's calling has been serving as a pastor to a congregation of families. And that's how I like to consider myself, a family engagement expert. I teach, I preach, I counsel, I baptize, I marry, I funeralize. But the one root reality of all of that, the most common denominator, is that they're all families. And so for me as a pastor, family engagement in my Judeo-Christian church and the art of it and the science of it is absolutely important. I've had the opportunity to work in child welfare as a statewide division director, or what would have been akin to an assistant commissioner here in New Jersey under the John Corzine administration, 2006-2009, where we, along with my good friend Morris Summers Doogie, who is a lifetime board member of Prevent Child Abuse America, working with Dr. Melissa Merrick and Bob Sagan and many others, Bruce Perry. She and so many of us in New Jersey really helped shape what became a new department. And I had the honor of working in that new department as the first statewide director of the Division of Prevention and Community Partnerships under the new Department of Children and Families. And then I've had the opportunity to serve at the United Nations, where I still serve, representing the Baptist World Alliance, which is a consortium of about 47 million Christians of Protestant background, working to promote and preserve human rights, child protection, and freedom of religion and speech. And so my experiences, yet diverse, all come back to a common passion for working with families and engaging them no matter where they are. I want to start my conversation off today with this question, rhetorical of to be sure, can hope be measured? Can hope be measured? Maybe some of us might say, can prevention be measured? Can resilience be measured? And oftentimes we so focus on intervention that we forget that we can indeed measure prevention. We can quantify, we can codify, we can measure resilience and hope. And part of what I am absolutely interested in is how we capture these data points, these metrics, and use them and transition them into policy making, so that not only do we in the field measure and appreciate the quantification of hope and resilience, but that lawmakers and policymakers in state capitals around America and in Washington, D.C. also can appreciate those data points. And it's important that we don't just make policy driven out of reaction to crises, but that we make policy downstream, upstream, I should say, in figuring out how to keep families safe before they get into crisis. So I'm answering my own rhetorical question. Yes, indeed, hope can be measured. And there are many folk, I love this picture, objects in mirror are closer than they appear. And as you look through your rearview mirrors, trying to perhaps drive away from something that happened in your past, what Bob Felitti, Dr. Felitti and Dr. Anna both helped us understand in the grade 8 study was we often can't drive fast enough away from our past. Our past will catch up to us. And I often say we ought to deal with our stuff before our stuff deals with us. What is hope? Certainly, Dr. Segi has given us a tremendous grounding in the framework of healthy outcomes from positive experiences. I want to cite a few definitions that I use in my work as a pastor in an urban congregation serving multiple types and constituencies of families. Hope is to believe that something positive, which does not presently apply to one's own life, could still materialize. Hope is the ability to envision a future in which we wish to participate. Simply put, hope is the ability to envision a tolerable future. Hope is an emotion that occurs when an individual is focused on an important positive future outcome. Often the individual perceives little personal control over the situation. The individual may see a positive outcome as somewhat unlikely and yet still expect it to occur. I think what's common to all of these definitions of hope is a statement of future orientation, that if we're stuck in our current situation, stuck in our past, then it's harder to envision our future. And so I am in my counseling sessions in our congregation and in community, because we also have a separate 501c3 where we get state and federal and public funding to do programming that are not so much anchored in a confessional faith background, but really engages on a socio-clinical background around hope, around counseling and therapy. And so we run faith-based mentoring programs with young people who have been exposed to urban violence in the city of Trenton in partnership with the New Jersey Department of Children and Families and other county and city initiatives. So hope is future-oriented. We understand that. Hope is upward focused. And I want to cite some great colleagues as I define hope. At the University of Alberta in Canada, Dr. Denise Larson has amassed what some believe to be or what she purports to be one of the largest research bodies of hope, the construct of hope. 4,500 research theory references on hope at the University of Alberta. And I invite you to take a look at her website. She says in her work, my primary research interest is in the study of hope as it relates to counseling, psychology, and educational practices. I lead Hope Studies Central, a research unit with a 25-year history in the Faculty of Education at the University of Alberta. I'm a registered psychologist, a former elementary classroom teacher, and the multiple ways in which she uses this research, I think, is intriguing, particularly to those of us in the pastoral counseling fields and practical theological fields. So in referring to Dr. Denise Larson from the University of Alberta, Canada, I certainly also want to cite, as Dr. Segi has mentioned, Dr. Christina Bethel, who we're going to hear from a little bit later this afternoon in our session. Her work at the Child and Adolescent Health Measurement Initiative certainly has been noteworthy in answering this question, can we measure hope? And she has partnered with Dr. Segi, as we've heard, in absolutely capturing the data and the metrics of what are the results of positive childhood experiences, and helping those of us in the field understand that the earlier we can reach children and the more positive experiences that we can give them, the better off they're going to be, and the more that will mitigate and challenge the adverse experience that so many children, really, I think all children in some form, experience to one degree or another. So certainly we can acknowledge and answer the question, yes, of course, we can measure hope. Can Dr. Melissa Merrick, who before taking the presidency and CEO, Chief Executive Officership at Prevent Child Abuse America, was the senior epidemiologist and lead researcher for ACEs at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Her work with ACEs inherited from the great studies of Dr. Anda and Dr. Felitti, and then building onto that work with Essentials for Childhood has been incredible. And we're fortunate to have her at the helm of PCAA. I love this quote from Melissa. I think this is a critically important public health topic. If we have healthier kids, we will have healthy adults. I mean, it's pretty simple in that respect. I'm trained as a child psychologist, so yes, I'm a child person, but we can't just care about kids and not care about their parents. And we can't just care about their parents and families without thinking about the community. And we can't think about the community without recognizing that the community exists within a socio-political context. So I think this move to assuring the conditions for health and well-being, to be honest, that's the basic tenet of public health in general. I love what Melissa says, because again, as Dr. Segi has mentioned, we can't isolate children. We can't fix them, take them out of a quote unquote family, as we used to think, fix them and put them back into a family, because that does not help the family context. And so children exist within families, families exist within communities, communities and neighborhoods exist within larger frames, the ecological model, as we know all too well. So this conversation, as we often hear, adverse child experiences, adverse community experiences, I like to also state and say adverse colonial experiences. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that a little bit later. Dr. Froma Walsh from the University of Chicago, who used to be the president of the American Association of Marriage and Family Therapists, has certainly given air to how we capture and measure the effects of resilience and, in this case, hope. And so I'm using hope synonymously with resilience and how we measure that research. We often have heard of resilience research. We have not, this is a new metric, I think, or new construct for us to measure hope research. Dr. Bruce Perry, another colleague from Prevent Child Abuse America's board, and certainly his work in the neurosequential model has been groundbreaking. And so he has absolutely said, Darrell, not only do I affirm the role of spirituality and faith in what you're doing in this work, but we've got to capture it. We've got to measure it. And certainly Dr. Segi in his work at Tufts Medical Center and all that he is doing with promoting hope. I love one of the enduring legacies that I certainly have fun saying is that Bob was able to change the ACES Connection name to PACES Connection name, and leave it up to Bob to have that kind of immediate impact. But how obvious was that, right? We so much tended to focus on adversity, and now positivity comes before adversity. And so kudos to you, Dr. Segi, Bob, and all of our good colleagues at our Hope Initiative. One of the things that I'm doing in my own research in our congregation and trying to expand this across the country is how do congregations capture and promote a construct of hope in partnership with our social science, social service agencies in our community. And so I started something when I left state government called Congregational Home Visiting, a faith-based practice of connecting with families in their homes. And so often pastors, rabbis, imams, priests, sheikhs would say to families, come to the house of worship and meet me, right? And now I want to reverse that and say to the sheikhs, the imams, the pastors, the priests, I would like for you and members of your parish, your temple, your synagogue to go into the homes of the families. And I know that's challenging in this environment in which we find ourselves, but I absolutely think it is critical because home visiting has been a proven method of early engagement, and early engagement has been a proven method of mitigating adversity in families' lives. I started something called the Institute for Clergy Training, helping to train house pastors and imams and sheikhs on what it means to be trauma informed. And so we are canvassing the country, looking for partners that are in houses of worship to help them understand the science of hope, the science of resilience, the science of trauma, and help them to inculcate that and implement practices, best practices within their houses of worship. One of the things we created was something called the Family Strengthening Covenant, and having clergy sign a covenant that talks about different models and modalities of family engagement and committing to do certain things in a given year. You can go to our website, shilohcdc.org, and find more information about our Family Strengthening Covenant. But the congregational home visiting approach, framework approach, I'm kind of in between at this point. I'm calling it a positive practice as we move towards best practice, is partnering with the NFPs and the HFAs sites and the Triple P sites, the Early Head Start sites, the Hippie sites, the PAT sites, right? All of those models that do home visiting, we're not trying to at all displace them. We're trying to learn from them and trying to partner with them in doing home-based family engagement. And one of the research pieces that I like to cite is families consider their religious backgrounds an important factor in how they parent. In a survey of 17,000 parents conducted by 0 to 3 about 10 years ago, and I'm excited that Dr. Segi is going to do another parent survey, and we want to get some metrics, some data points in there about faith, religion, and spirituality in that survey, Bob. But this survey tells us that the second biggest influence on parenting is a person's faith and religious background. And so that's why I want to say to all of my partners in social and social science and social service entities and agencies, please do not overlook houses of worship as partners in your work. I know it can be a bit cumbersome, but on behalf of the clergy, I am asking you to please partner with us. And I'm asking my colleagues to partner with you because it is in the best interest of children and families. This research tells us that and helps us to understand that, right? Every pastor has to understand before they dedicate that child, 80% of that child's brain is going to develop between the ages of birth to 5. And really, some would say birth to 3. The great majority of a child's brain is developing. And so neuroscience of child welfare is a marriage that was not as robust 10, 15, 20 years ago as it is now. And so we can now document through MRI scans and see how ventricular areas of the brain are affected because of adversity. And we want to mitigate against that. And so clergy, you have a real opportunity, I always tell them, to participate. And so presidents kiss a lot of babies, but I don't think I've seen too many presidents bless a baby. Mayors hold and kiss a lot of babies, but they don't bless or baptize children or babies. That is reserved for the sole purpose or sole area of clergy, of all faiths. Whatever your baby ritual is in your faith, I want you to ask your leader of your faith tradition, halt it until they go through some early childhood educational training and take the parents through that same training. So I literally have asked tell my families, I'm not going to bless your child until you sit down with me and my team and go through at least 7 sessions on ages and stages of development, help you to understand shaken baby syndrome and sudden infant death syndrome, co-sleep, no sleep, helping folk to understand all of these realities before I bless that child. Because guess what? When I do that, that child's blessing, christening, baptism, whatever the ritual, is going to be that much richer and better. And so some of the outcomes we are seeing from this clergy home visiting, congregational home visiting model is that parents have a hope-laden start to their baby's future, and positive development is highlighted early. Parents and caregivers are given individual attention by me as best I can, and then I send a team of home visitors to meet with them. I don't do it all. That's one of the big feedback that I get from clergy. I can't possibly do all of that, Pastor Armstrong. I'm saying, ma'am or sir, I'm not asking you to do it all. Just do one visit, one home visit. You will blow the family's mind if you go to them and not just have them come to you. That will set the stage for partnership, rich partnerships, unbelievable partnerships. Parent and caregivers are linked with other new parents in our congregation as resource families. So I have 40-year-old moms and dads, nuclear families who are mentoring and partnering with a teenage mom in our congregational home visiting model. It promotes intergenerational approach to family engagement, and baby and family are cared for and engaged in the context of their religious tradition. And I just showed you the research slide that said that's important in their parenting. So church is not just where you come hear a sermon. Church is where you get life principles and life practices that are going to help and promote positive outcomes. I'm going to keep coming back to hope. So we certainly know how to measure trauma and adversity. That's not a question, right? Most of our research started with the measurement of the adverse effects of trauma. This slide is always amazing to me. $671 billion estimate, the annual cost of trauma through all of the systems: incarceration, homelessness, child welfare, human services, right? You can trace it back to the number one cause of death in America. Some would say, many would say, is related to trauma. And so, I often link trauma and poverty because poverty and racial breakdown of poverty is certainly important in this conversation. When we talk about the social determinants of health, this is a key part of it. How has the racialization of America affected its families, our families? And so 21%, and that number really hasn't changed in the last 12 years since this study came out from the Children's Defense Fund. About 21 to 22% of all of American children live in poverty still. And if you look at that number by race, we see 33 for our Latinx brothers and sisters, and 36, if not greater, for our African descended Black families in America. I would that no family would live in poverty, especially not have to give attention to race and poverty, but that's not the reality we're living in. And I'm going to get to why in a moment. But as we look at extreme poverty, we look at the racial breakdown of extreme poverty, and Black children under 5 are most vulnerable from this reality. So for me as a Black pastor in a urban community like Trenton, no different than where I grew up in South Central Los Angeles, no different than where I lived after I got out of Stanford. I lived in Palo Alto, I lived in East Palo Alto when I was going to school, but I lived in East Palo Alto when I got out of Stanford. When I came east, I went to school in Princeton. When I got out, I lived in Trenton. And so I don't care if it's Trenton, South Central Los Angeles, or East Palo Alto, these numbers are still the same. And they are realities that we must face when talking about hope, because you can't just talk about the positivity without addressing the adversity. But I don't want to stay in the adversity without addressing how we promote the positivity as well. The National Center for Children in Poverty has given us some later statistics, again, by race. Percentage of children in low income and poor families by race, 61% of Black children are in low income experiences, 34% in poor experiences, deep poverty, Black, 17%. And you look across the racial spectrum, our Native American, Indigenous communities, our white brothers and sisters, and we often think because these numbers are the way they are, that somehow Blacks constitute the greatest numbers of poverty. This is by our proportion to to our population. But more folk who are our white brothers and sisters are living in poverty by sheer numbers. We know that. But when we break it down by race, these numbers are important. Black Lives Matter. I often say, until Black Lives Matter, all lives have to be questioned, right? Because the Black Lives Matter are the folk the Black lives in America have often been those who have been at the bottom of our social services ladder, at the bottom of our social status ladder. And so often folks say, well, what about white lives? Of course they matter. What about Latinx lives? Of course what about Indigenous? Of course. But in America, Black lives have often been devalued, and often not too many other races have been made to be property, inanimate objects. And so until we acknowledge the humanity in everybody, the humanity in all of us is challenged. And so that's my little bit about the Black Lives Matter moniker. I say it, but I conditionally say it, until all Black lives matter, all of us are challenged. I was blown away that American city like Baltimore, where Dr. Bethel does her work at Johns Hopkins University, went through what it went through. But my God, all of America experienced what Baltimore experienced some years ago for the same reasons. Freddie Gray in Baltimore, George Floyd in Minneapolis. And it led to despair, it led to hopelessness, and it really reminded us of our deep and challenging past of slavery. And so these images is what we want. These images are where we started, at least in America, because I often remind us this was not the plight of Black men in Africa before they were enslaved, and Black families in Africa. This became reality in America in 1619 and have moved forward. And so we want this to be the image of Black malehood in America. And yet, sadly, we are reminded that often this is the image. Mr. Chauvin, whose knee is literally depleting the life out of George Floyd. And so the movement that has spread across America and across the world is important for us to understand in context of promoting hope. Because until we deal with reality, until we deal with the realities of our adversities, right, our hope might seem anemic and shortchanged. People who have experienced trauma, right? Dr. Segi has reminded us of this, and all of our social determinants of health data gives us this, right? Those of us who have experienced trauma are more at risk. trauma trees abound now, and I love the various types of trauma trees that talk to us about this. Bob ended his talk not too long ago by citing trees, right? Those that have experienced trauma, some who have not experienced trauma, some that are admired, others that have been cut down. But certainly Sister Ellis's work and this image is lingering, because for everything that we see above ground, there's so much below ground that we don't see. ACEs, we know that the 10 ACEs did not cover the expanse of adversities that could be measured. And so we're now looking at a plethora of additional ACEs, right? Cyberbullying was not an ACE when Dr. Felitti and Dr. Anda did their research. It is now. Acts of terrorism that we've experienced since 2001 to such an international level, at least for America, because other places in the world have often lived with acts of terrorism. But now we are considering the effects of adversity in early childhood. And I would even dare say, and others of my colleagues have said, the pandemic itself will certainly be measured as an ACE, an adverse childhood experience. Mom, why can't I go to school? Mom, Dad, why can't I play with my friends? Why do I have to wear the mask? I don't understand this. I'm not being able to learn by virtual. Why don't I have the equipment to get on to the computer? Why don't I have a computer? Right? These certainly will have lingering effects on this population of children going forward. And so the adversities measured against the positivities, the resilience, the biology of stress, the science of hope. I love that statement, the biology of stress, toxic stress particularly, and the science of hope. Resilience is the ability to bounce back from setbacks in our lives. It is the way we can prevent stress from causing serious physical, mental, and emotional issues. Practicing positive and often simple activities can actually retrain our brain to be more resilient. Bob talked about the plasticity of the brain. A big word that I'm introducing to our congregation is epigenetics, right? They're looking at me funny, right? Pastor, what are we talking about? And I say to them, the brain God gave you can indeed regenerate itself, but it's going to take work on your behalf. And so this science against social science, against hard physical science, against religious science is important for me to integrate into the work that I do. And so as I close and get ready to close my presentation today, many of you have heard me talk about my own personal story, and I do that certainly in no way to promote me, but it is to say for every one of me in your case workload, in your particular situation in Wisconsin, in West Virginia, I don't care if you're black, white, red, or brown, I don't care if you're gay, lesbian, gay, transgender, questioning, straight, I don't care if you're Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, I don't care if you're urban, suburban. There are children and families that have this story, some a little bit more challenged and acute, some less acute. But this story is simply a reminder, probably to many of us on this call itself, that for all the work that we do, some of this is also your story. And so for me to tell my story has been this process of not letting my past capture me, debilitate me, and harness me from achieving my future. And so my ability to tell the story is rooted in helping someone else tell their own story, because someone in your load, in your list of families, Northwest, Southwest, Midwest, Southeast, Northeast, Mid-Atlantic, somebody is locked up, and perhaps a bit of disclosure strategically placed will help them to also grapple with their past and tell their story. And so my mom, 14 when she got pregnant, 15 when she gave birth to me, the oldest of her 4 boys, did not live past 45. And I often say that she was addicted to hard substances like crack and cocaine. She didn't get addicted until she was in her later teens, but she was also addicted to an abusive relationship. And when domestic violence and intimate partner violence co-occurs with child abuse and neglect, it's a toxic situation. And that was the reality of life for me, my brother, and me for the first 5 years of my life, first 2 years of his. This is the last picture I have with my mom before she passed, not too long after this picture was taken in 1998. She had just celebrated her 45th birthday. She didn't get a chance to come up to see her son graduate from college. She was wrestling with her addiction. And part of the story is that mom, who, when she met my dad, who's pictured here, I didn't meet him until I was 21 while I was a student at Stanford. And fatherhood issues is a large part of what I do within our congregation as well. Because often young boys are angry because they didn't know their father. And young girls are searching for a father figure, and it is often in the wrong face, in the wrong place. And so fatherhood, another topic, another presentation. But we need to also deal with paternal child health, just like we deal with maternal child health. And really, they should never be decoupled. It should always be parent-child health. Because for every mother that has a child, there's a daddy that participated in that child's life somewhere. And I wanted to find mine. And I did. And we are building a relationship. It's not perfect, but we're building one. And my mom, right, he was not involved in her life. He was 18. They moved on. Mom went on to meet another gentleman, have another baby, my second brother. And he moved on, got incarcerated. And so I remember vivid images of going back and forth to visit an incarcerated boyfriend of my mom's between the ages of birth and 5, when 80% of my brain was developing. And I remember images of when mom wanted to be a mom, she would come pick me up from my grandmama's house. And when she didn't want to be a mom, after all, she was still a teenager, she would drop me off at my grandmama's house. And so mom wrestled with a lot of challenges in her life: teen pregnancy, substance abuse, intimate partner violence, child abuse and maltreatment, law enforcement, juvenile justice and family court. All of those systems my mother had to figure out how to navigate and didn't do a good job. And was challenged by those systems. And yet, as Bob said, for all of the adversity that we may experience in our lives, we have to be able to recognize when there are some angels. My mom's story and our story ends, so to speak, with mom's boyfriend, not my dad pictured here, not my brother's dad, but another gentleman. And the statistics tell us that the more men a single mother has, the more male companions a woman with children have in her life. The more companions a woman with children have in her life, the greater the chances for child abuse and neglect. And so my mom's third boyfriend at this time, when she was 19, got her hooked on heroin, hooked on crack. I remember them shooting, wrapping tubes around their arms, melting the syringe and melting the crack, put it on the spoon, injecting the syringe into their arms, right? Those are vivid memories of a 5-year-old, a 6-year-old, a 7-year-old. When I was 5, my mom's boyfriend would thump us on our heads if we didn't go to sleep, besides physically abusing us. But I remember the thumping as something strange, as a way of punishment. And thumping a 5-year-old on his head is one thing. Thumping repeatedly a 2-year-old when their brain and muscular tissue is still forming is another thing. And so we were removed for the first time from mom's custody because of multiple contusions on my brother's brain. We were then placed back with mom, who had not done the work necessary to receive us and had not left the man who had abused us and her. I remember her also being viciously hit. One night, that boyfriend, not my dad who's pictured here, but another boyfriend, put my brother in a tub of scalding hot water after a drug binge. 2-year-old, or at that time, a 4-year-old, in a tub of scalding hot water. 75% of his body was endured 2nd and 3rd degree burns. And as a result, we were taken away permanently from mom's custody. My brother could have died that night. And child fatality review boards all over America, unfortunately, know this reality all too well. For often, the greatest proportion of child fatalities in municipalities and states are children under the age of 1. So vulnerable. And I remember that night when my mom's boyfriend put my brother in that tub of scalding hot water. The screams, the pitch of those screams shall never be forgotten. We found ourselves in the hospital that night. I don't know who called who, how the police came, but they did, the ambulances. And as a result, my brother stayed in the hospital recuperating from his injuries. And a dear woman by the name of Dorothy, Mama Dorothy, we called her, who happens to have been that brother's great paternal aunt. On his dad's side, his dad's aunt raised him from the time that he was 3+ and came out of the hospital after this abusive act. And then I went to 3 different foster homes for several years, for about 1.5 years, I should say. One for a week, one for a month, one for about 1 year and 2 or 3 months. Not understanding why, because every child wants to be with their mother. They don't understand that they are crack addicted or heroin addicted. And I'll never forget asking my granddad, how many nights I'm going to stay over here? Because I eventually came to stay with my grandfather and my step grandmother. And I became the 6th child in a family of 8 and a small 3-bedroom house in South Central LA. And I often say that your zip code is not determinant of your future. And yet Robert Wood Johnson reminds us that the same child, 2 children, 15 minutes apart, 2 different zip codes can have a 20-year differential of life. And so growing up in South Central LA, many of my friends in zip code 90044, some of you know it, had a very different life experience than Beverly Hills 99210. Same thing in East Palo Alto and Palo Alto. Same thing in Princeton and Trenton. Same thing in your communities, wherever you are. And so I grew up with my grandfather, step grandmother. 10 years later, they divorced. I had to move out of the home of my step grandmother, went to live with a teacher from high school during my senior year in high school, and was fortunate and blessed that I had earned a scholarship and admission into Stanford University before all of that happened. So I went to college in 1987 and have been working on becoming a better version of me since then. But my mom, I always wondered and worried about her. And in 1998, I got news that I feared would happen. She succumbed to her addiction. She overdosed on crack and heroin. And this is the sad reality, is she was with the same man who was with her, who put her 3-year-old baby boy in a tub of scalding hot water. 27 years later, she stayed with this man, 27 years, and endured the abuse. And so part of telling this story is helping to liberate, not just provide hope for our children, but provide hope for mothers and fathers, some fathers who are in intimate partner violence situations from which they need to liberate themselves. And it is not easy to do that. And so providing hope for those families and those individuals is also part of this conversation. My mom went on to have 2 more babies by this man who abused her and abused her first 2 babies. So she had a total of 4 boys. And those 4 boys all were removed from her custody. And so part of what I want to say is that I didn't get to where I am by myself. I got to where I am because of some awesome angels. And one of those angels was the Reverend Richmond Brown, pastor of the Holy Light Missionary Baptist Church in Los Angeles, California. he often used to say, gotta be a mother when you don't have one, and gotta be a father when you don't have one. And for me, growing up in his congregation, that made a lot of sense, because he didn't know I was in foster care. He didn't know what had happened, but his words gave me hope. And that reminds me of what the late Peter Benson and the Search Institute gives us also well in the 40 developmental assets. One of those asset number 19, talks about religious community experiences. Young people involved in a faith community benefit in at least 3 ways. They are more likely to have positive values. They have strong bonds with people of different ages and interests. And number 3, they spend less time experimenting with risky behaviors than those not involved in a community religious experience. And so again, the science bears out what we know to be true. The more positive people and persons around a child who have experienced adversity is going to help that child. Certainly my grandmama was my most enduring and endearing influence on me, my most enduring and endearing angel. And this is her holding my son, her great-grandson, for the first time. And that same kind of grandmotherly maternal love is what she transmitted to me when I was birthed to 5, is the same that she transmits in this picture. Roberta Hawkins, many of you heard me talk about Roberta, one of my first social workers. Roberta, I just saw her 2 months ago. What an angel she has been in my life. I often tell the story. She would pick me up for my social work visit, take me to Burger King or McDonald's. She'd often say, "A penny for your thoughts." I wouldn't say anything because I was still dealing with my stuff. But after she came, I lost touch with Roberta. I found her. I invited her to my high school graduation from Reseda High in the San Fernando Valley. Invited her to my Stanford graduation, invited her to my Princeton graduation, invited her to my installation at the Shiloh Church in 2000, invited her to the christening of my first and second children. I'm just enrolling in a Doctor of Social Work program at USC. And 2 years from now, prayerfully, when I graduate from there, Roberta will be there to see me get a Doctor of Social Work from the University of Southern California, because she has been that kind of angel. And that kind of angel and angelic presence has no race. It has no religious codification. Love knows no boundaries. And this saintly woman, and I do consider her a saintly woman, has been a fixture in Darrell Armstrong's life since 1974. It's 1975. I'm 52 years old now. And so those kinds of angels make the difference in providing hope. I'm going to close with this story about me visiting President Obama's family, his grandmother in Kogelo, Kenya, East Africa. It was such a blessed opportunity for me to meet the late Mama Sarah. And there she is on the right. God bless her soul. That mural was literally taken from that picture. And I tried to insert myself in the mural any which way I could, because I was so excited. And when I met her in person, I drudged up the courage to ask if I could be adopted, one of the adopted grandsons into the family. And don't you know, she said she gave me an on-the-spot adoption. So I didn't need a CASA worker and I didn't need a family court judge. I was adopted into the Obama family, and I couldn't wait to get back home to America to call up my cousin, President number 44, and say, "Hey, cuz, your grandmother just adopted me into the family." What a gift that was. And she just passed last week, March 29th. And so I cite that story because Kenya, Kogelo, Kenya is literally 10,000 miles away from South Central Los Angeles. And there was this little Black boy who had grown up in the Los Angeles Department of Children and Family Services system most of his life, and had a lot of folk help me overcome some of those adversities, but a lot of folk who provided hope. And this president talked about hope. That grandmother, I think, lived hope. And sometimes that's all you have when you have nothing else. If you have it, you have everything. Children should motivate us. And if we have children of our own, they should motivate us to do the very best, not only for ours, but for others. This is my daughter, Maris, reciting one of her Resurrection Sunday speeches in church several years ago. And this is her now as a freshman last year. She's a sophomore now in her local high school, public high school. My son Daniel, without hair, reciting his resurrection speech. My son Daniel as a 8th grader, just before he went into his 9th grade year this year. And there we are last March at my 20th anniversary. And so I'm not perfect and I've not overcome every adversity, but I do tell you that I have been blessed with a lot of folk around me. And if you can be one of those persons that can bless a child to provide hope and healthy outcomes for positive experiences, then we can help families break the cycle of poverty and adversity. A little update on my brothers. This is that brother that was put in a tub of scalding hot water. And there we are holding our 2 firstborn children. Both had girls. And little big brother Darrell became little brother in size, but he's still my little brother Quincy. And he's doing well, living in South Central LA still. His daughter is going to be graduating and she's looking to go to college. He's had his challenges, but he's overcome those challenges. And these are my last 2 brothers, both of whom have had some challenges with incarceration. And we're trying to be brothers. Didn't come from the best of circumstances, but when life gives you lemons, I want you to squeeze hard and make some lemonade. Let us promote healthy outcomes and positive experiences, and let those be the ones that supersede the adverse childhood experiences for America's families. God bless you. Bob, thank you for the work. Thank you for the invitation. And I'm excited to be a part of the Help Network.